sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
Welcome to Rabbi On The Sidelines. This is Rabbi Sherman from Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. This week we are joined by a legend in a sport that we have not spoken about yet. This is the sport of surfing. We are joined by Shaun Tomson, world champion in 1977, and author of this amazing, inspiring book, The Surfer and the Sage by Shaun Tomson and Noah Ben Shea. Shaun, it is so great to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Rabbi, it's great to be on the show. I'm sure that that surfing and Judaism, there's a connection there, but I think not too many people know about it.
Well, maybe we start with the crossing of the sea, where you think there were surfboards at that time with Moses. How did they get across that sea?
Well, I think it was an exceptionally low tide, and the tide was going out, and Moses timed it perfectly with some divine intervention.
Divine intervention and miracles. Actually, the miracle of the sea is not that that happened, but that we're still talking about it today. And I think that's really your story right here of the surfer and the sage, that your journey is sort of improbable in terms of both the suffering that you witnessed in your own family, but also the achievement and purpose in life that you have been able to find and to inspire others as well. So let's just start from the beginning, because you're not from the United States, but how do you begin to love the ocean as a young person? The ocean is large and in charge. How does that love of the ocean come about?
Yeah, large and in charge. I like that. Well, I grew up on the beach in Durban, South Africa. My father was born in South Africa. His parents came over from Riga during the pogroms at the turn of the century. My mom was born in England, grew up on the island of Malta in the Second World War, which was the most heavily bombed place in the history of the world. Even to this day, she endured 3,600 air raids.
Wow.
And then the island eventually starved. It was a strategic seaport in the Mediterranean run by the British, and it was bombed by the Nazis and the Italians. And then eventually she was evacuated after 4 years, ended up in South Africa, met my dad. They both loved the beach. They both loved the ocean. So my earliest memories are of growing up right there on the beach, my dad teaching me how to swim and surf. So it was sort of a natural progression. He'd been a great lover of the ocean, and he'd been one of South Africa's top athletes during his youth. His dream was to swim for his country and win an Olympic gold medal. But then he was very badly attacked by a shark.
Right.
And it nearly killed him, nearly bit his arm off. But ultimately he survived. But both of them were people of faith, and they were both people of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what had happened to them in their youth, my dad with the terrible shark attack, my mom, enduring 3,600 air raids, 2 direct hits. They both had this optimism, this faith, this hope, this light, which I think really symbolizes our faith, light.
And so that symbolizes the faith aspect, but now take us to the wave. I'm going to show you a quick video here of you surfing, about what it means to catch the first wave. So let's watch this and talk about how that idea of faith and light goes into the ocean.
My first memory of catching that first wave imprinted on me. And I think every surfer gets that feeling of seeing the world differently. And your life changes in that moment. For me, there was more to surfing than just catching waves. I always looked at what surfing had to offer below the surface, hitting that wave and riding through that tube of water that shot out the end like you're being shot out the end of a cannon. It's a sensation of just being in control and connected to the environment, connected to nature.
So you catch that first wave. How do you do that? So many of us look out into the ocean, and as a surfer, you look back into the land. What is that moment of catching that first wave? First of all, what are the technical skills that perhaps are involved? What are the actually emotional and mental strength that you need to actually catch that first wave?
Well, like I said in the clip, when you catch that wave for the first time, for many people, it can be life-changing. And certainly when you jump up on that board for the first time and you look back towards the land and you ride back towards the land, you just see life differently. I mean, yes, you see it differently from sort of an analog perspective, but I think from a soul perspective, you just see the world differently. It's like you're riding on this band of energy that was created by a storm thousands of miles away, and it's unseen, but you can feel it. And it's such a wonderful, it's such a wonderful sensation. So for me, there was certainly a gradual evolution because I started swimming. My dad taught me to swim, and then he taught me how to body surf. And then we had these small little belly boards that we rode on. So it was sort of this gentle progression. And when I stood up on a board for the first time, I was ready to stand up on a board for the first time. So it wasn't like I'd been through this process of instruction. It was like a process of evolution, which is a great way, I think, for an athlete to develop a love. There's no sort of, well, you've got to do it this way. This is the type of technique. It was just sort of more learning by osmosis. And it was very much this sensation derived attraction. You know, I just love that sensation, this feeling of connectivity, of flow, of excitement, of exhilaration. Surfers call it being stoked. When you get stoked, you get that sort of magnetic connectivity to what you're doing, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful moment. I mean, a lot of athletes, certainly, it's your fundamental basis for being an athlete. You know, you have this incredible sensation that is derived from what you're doing, from being in a state of flow, being in a state of control, being in a state of optimum concentration. But certainly there is a difference with surfing because you're not bounded by rules. There's no real coach. There's no teammate. It's just you're bored in the ocean. So you have a different sort of elemental attraction and connectivity. And then also there's the danger aspect too. You know, there's the danger. I mean, sharks are always sort of a part of my mental experience. But, you know, when you're riding a big wave, there's the danger of drowning. There's a danger of being hit by a coral reef. There's a danger of being run over by someone else. So there are many, many elements, many more elements at play, I think, with a surfer as opposed to football, baseball, basketball. It's different. It's not better. It's just very, very different.
You actually talk a lot about waiting in this book and waiting for the wave, but they talk about the difference between waiting for nothing and waiting for the wave, that basically you're an individual, but there's lots of people out there. I'm sitting in Los Angeles, but when I take rides out to Malibu, often I see less people on a wave than waiting for the waves. I thought you put in a beautiful perspective that how you sort of play with the other people waiting while also respecting the individual. So what does it mean, or what's the difference between waiting for nothing and then perhaps waiting for that sensation that you know when it's the right time, it will be there?
Well, you know, surfers sit there and they wait. I mean, sometimes in certain conditions, you can sit there and wait for a wave for 30 minutes, 40 minutes without getting a ride. But you do have that sort of focus, that hope, that optimism that that wave is going to come to you. So that even though there might be this perception that, well, what the hell are you waiting for? You're just waiting for a wave. You know, you're waiting for that experience, and you're hopeful and optimistic that you're going to get that experience. And also the waiting process, you're being drifted north, south, east, west by the tides, by the winds, by the current, and then also by your positioning and the relative positioning of other people. So there is a lot of, even though it might seem that you're just sort of sitting there waiting aimlessly, you're not sitting there waiting aimlessly, and you certainly are very purpose-driven in the waiting process, but you are sort of drifting, which is wonderful. It's sort of this languid feeling of floating and being in this little area between the ocean and the sky. You're just floating on that sort of thin surface tension. It's a wonderful feeling when you really think about what you're doing out there, and you sort of floating inside of the water, because you're not floating really on top. You're floating, you're maybe 1 or 2 feet below the surface, because I ride a small board. So there's this feeling of connectivity and being absorbed and part of nature. It's wonderful.
It's actually interesting. It goes back to the book of Genesis and Breshit, the Rakia and Hashamayim, when God separated the heavens and the earth. And it seems like the surfer is that person, that thing in between that maybe connects what God separated in the beginning of creation as well. I don't know if you ever thought of it in that way.
Even the firmament.
Exactly. So you say about surfing that no one has stood on a surfboard that did not fall off. I've spoken to many athletes and coaches and owners and managers and even fans, and successful grade in sports is like 35%, right? As somebody who hits 300 in baseball is going to the Hall of Fame. Somebody who's shooting over 50% in basketball is just doing amazing. Talk about the success rate of riding that wave and what it means to turn success into purpose. You talk a lot about turning things into purpose. Specifically, you talk about what a difference between a pessimist and an optimist is. You write that an optimist is somebody who finds opportunity in difficulty, and a pessimist is somebody who finds difficulty in opportunity. How do you take a low grade of how much percentage that you're going to succeed on a wave and turn that into optimism?
You know, this is where surfing is very different, because most other sports, well, not most, all other sports are defined by numerics. There's a batting average, RBIs, whatever the sport, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, there's a number associated with surfing. There's no number associated with surfing in a general sense. Surfing competitively, yes, you do get a score for a particular wave. You get a subjectively judged score, just like boxing matches is subjectively judged. So there is, I think, a difference there with the way that we see surfing, and the way that I respond to surfing now, even though my surfing career is a long way behind it. And I really do, like I said in the little clip, that I like to look below the surface. Like, what are the lessons that surfing can teach me about commitment, about hope, about attitude, about optimism, about pessimism? And I think fundamental to surfing is this feeling of stoke, this feeling of exhilaration, exuberance. And this is sort of the passion that drives you towards the sport. And then fundamental to that is that optimism and hope that you are going to get a wave out there, because you're not guaranteed of getting a wave. But as surfers, we do have this hopeful, optimistic attitude that, yes, we're going to sit out there, and maybe we'll sit out there for half an hour, but that wave will come to us.
And you really talk about perspective as well. You talked about in the end of your book, the one eye perspective. Maybe explain that idea of the one eye, how two people can see the same thing as a difference in a different perspective.
Yeah, so that was a funny story about going surfing at a break in South Africa, a break I'd never surfed before, a break that didn't have shark nets. When I grew up, we would only surf in areas that had shark nets, because there was there was a good chance of being attacked by a Zambezi shark, which is like smaller than a great white shark, but it's like a great white shark on steroids. Very aggressive, wow. Very aggressive shark. So we would only surf in netted areas. So this friend of mine took me to surf this break, and had an amazing experience with him, just the two of us out in the water. And I was getting these incredible tube rides, which is the ultimate in surfing. You ride inside this tunnel of water. It's called riding inside the tube. And that was really my specialty in surfing. And I paddled up to my friend after experiencing some great tube rides, and I said, what's the name of this wave? Because surfers have very descriptive names for the waves they ride. And he said, it's called one eye. I said, well, why do you call it one eye? He said, it's called one eye because when you're inside this tube, inside this tunnel of water, it looks like a human eye. And when you're inside the tube and you look out, it does look like an eye, because the wave is sort of an oval shape. And I went, well, that's a cool name. And then I had some great waves, and then I caught my last wave, and I kicked out, and I could feel this really eerie feeling, and all the hairs on my arms stood up, and I could feel that there was something in the water with me there. I knew that there was something big right there with me. And I looked over the side of my board and I saw this black shape heading towards me. And I looked over the other side and there was another black shape. So I thought for the moment there I was going to get consumed by 2 Zambezi sharks at the same time, and then burst out the water. It was 2 big dolphins. So these dolphins flew out the water and I just went, thank you, God, I'm not going to be consumed. And I went in and I walked up the beach. And as I was walking up the beach, there was a fisherman on the beach. And he said to me, you haven't been surfing out there, have you? And I went, of course I've been surfing out there. I'm dripping wet. I have my wetsuit on, my board under my arm. He said, do you know what we call the wave? I said, yeah, you call it one eye. He said, well, do you know why we call it one eye? I said, yeah, you call it one eye because when you're inside the tube, it looks like a human eye. He said, no, we call it one eye because there's a 12-foot Zambezi shark that lives out there in the lineup. And when it rolls over on its side to bite, all you can see is one eye. So it's a funny story about how 2 people, myself having this amazing, sublime experience riding inside the tube, and then there's the fisherman on the beach looking back at this break, and it's this place of terror where one eye lives. And it's just a funny story about how 2 people can see the same reality very differently. And in the context of what's been happening in the world over the last 3 or 4 years, since and before, how we can all look at the same thing and we can perceive it completely differently. And you know, one of the things that surfing teaches you is certainly respect for oneself, respect for the ocean, respect for others. And perhaps there just needs to be more respect from all of us in terms of looking at life perhaps through someone else's eyes.
Absolutely.
And that's a way that there can be more unity and more empathy in this world.
So when you talk about unity and empathy, we begin this episode, you talked about your parents and the suffering that they went through and the inspiration, if you wish, that you saw from what they went through. And I know you also went through your own suffering and the loss of your son of blessed memory in 2006. This is an interview that you talked about what you learned how to never come out of that suffering, but how to continue to lead your life as well.
To me, living examples of how you could lead your life, even though you've suffered and you've been through a tragic period. And then I lost my beautiful son, 15 and a half years old. My wife and I were destroyed in 2006. Our lives were shattered. And it took many years, but slowly we rebuilt the pieces. And surfing certainly helped me, rebuild the pieces. It took a while before, my stoke was burning again because it was extinguished after that. I had no desire to go surfing, and ultimately I did go surfing, and it helped me through those terrible times.
You talked about the light being extinguished, and in your book you talked about this sort of moment of aha when I believe you were sitting in a shul in a synagogue, and you looked at the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, and you realized that your son would always be with you. Maybe if you're comfortable sharing just the experiences of both being broken, but also rekindling that light of your son that continues with you today.
Yeah, I think after that period, when my wife and I lost our child, and you think that, you think that Hashem's deserted you. You think God's deserted you. You think, how could this happen to me? I was a good person. I try to do good for my sport, for my country, for my friends, my family, and like, how could this happen? How could this happen to me? You feel deserted. You feel adrift. Life is dark. And then I started going back to my old shul where I had my bar mitzvah, and it was called Temple David. Beautiful name, in Durban. And I would sit there and I'd look up at the ark, and then I'd look up at the Ner Tamid, and I think about light, and I think about how this is sort of foundational to life, to religion, to Judaism. And my son had written this essay shortly before he died. And in this essay, he'd written the words, "The light shines ahead." It was about tube riding. It was about what I was sort of known for in surfing, about creating a whole new way to ride the tube. And he wrote these words. So these words were very much a part of him. They became a part of me. And then when we were recovering from the terrible loss, and we're in a hospital, and a friend came to see us, and he said, I have a message from Matthew. And one bolt of lightning hit that hospital, one huge thunderclap out of a completely clear sky, Rabbi. It was like mind-blowing to be sitting there and have someone say, I have a message from Matthew. He wants to know he's okay. He made a mistake. One bolt of lightning. And it was like God was telling me something. And then that was sort of a start of our path forward in that one bolt of light. Eventually, a friend of mine that I was at school with kept phoning me up, Shaun, I'd love to take you surfing again. You need to go surfing again. And it'd been a couple of months. And eventually said, okay, I'll go surfing with you. So he took me to a break. And this is how life and God can work. So he took me to this break. I'd never surfed before. And we walked down these steps, and the sun was rising. It's on the East Coast where I used to live in South Africa. So the sun was rising out of the ocean. It was just amazing. It was such an amazing sight to see the sun boiling up out of the ocean. And I just felt connected to my son, and connected to life, connected to God. And then I paddled out. And then as I was crying, it was like the waves were washing into me, and they were washing my tears away. It was amazing. And then I sat and I waited for a wave, and I could feel Matthew was with me. Matthew, his name in Hebrew means gift from God. That's what our son was. So I caught my first wave, and I could feel, man, Matthew was with me. And I rode the first wave and paddled back out, and I rode another wave and paddled back out and rode another wave. And then I paddled back out, and I said to my friend, what's the name of this wave? He said to me, Sunrise. How about that? That was the name of and with all these things coming together, I felt that there was something bigger. It wasn't just me, but there was something there that was what was a lot bigger, that was there to maybe guide me and comfort me. And then, I took my life down a different path. I went down a path of using what I'd learned, and using what I'd managed to do to deal with my loss. How could I perhaps help other people? And I found it really, really helped me. Yes, it helped others, but it really helped me. And that's the path that I've been on for the last, since 2006, speaking and showing people how to make sense of tragedy, and how to make sense of life. And perhaps here's my perspective. That's all I do. I don't give a prescription. Here's my perspective, and here's my code. And I talked about surface code, this code that I developed many years ago before I lost Matthew, and how everyone can use their code. 12 lines, every line begins with I will, to create a new path and a new start.
So here's the code when you appeared on the Today Show, I believe just this past year. And this idea of the code and the stories that come out of that code are unbelievable. Like you said, from the woman who wrote you from prison, and just all of these different people. So this is Shaun Tomson on the Today Show talking about the meaning of the code.
The code I developed about 20 years ago. I wrote 12 lines, every line beginning with I will, to empower these young people that were coming down to the beach that was facing an environmental problem. So it was, I will always paddle back out. I will never turn my back on the ocean. Basic lessons that surfing had taught me about life. And now I get hundreds of thousands of people around the world to write their own.
That don't all have to do with surfing or the ocean or...
Correct. Businessmen, PTSD survivors, people in rehab clinics, massive conglomerates. So it's just a way for people to empower themselves and think about how to catch the next wave.
Yeah.
How to catch the next wave. And in that clip, you talk about the difference between I try and I will. Because I try, you said, it's up here, but I will. When you write that on paper, you see what you did. So explain how you went from the surfer's code, I believe many years ago, to the code, which is just out more recently.
Yes, so I wrote Surfer's Code many years ago to inspire and empower these young people that were coming to the beach as a way to inspire environmental consciousness. And I made them up. I turned the 12 lines into a little card, and I gave the cards out, and the cards became popular, and the cards eventually led to my first book called Surfer's Code, which was an exploration of each of the 12 lines. But every single line began with those two words of absolute, unequivocal commitment, I will. And especially from an athlete's perspective, you will not succeed unless you have a committed attitude. There is no way, no matter what sport you play, unless you are absolutely committed, you will not succeed. But athletics is very difficult, and sometimes it's very hard to focus and find a clear path forward. And I found 12 lines, every line begins with I will. It's a really wonderful way to look at your life and to look at your mission in a very simple but very effective and powerful way. So I was speaking at a school after I came out with my first book about Surfer's Code, and on the spur of the moment, I said to the young students, they were high school students, a little school in Santa Barbara, Surfer's Code's my code. I wrote it in 15 minutes, 12 lines. Every line begins with I will. What about all of you writing your codes? 12 lines, every line begins with I will. Just write down your purpose, write your path, find your power. So the very first line of code I got back was from a young girl, and this was in 2006 or 2007. I will be myself. Mm-hmm. Now, based on what had happened to our beautiful son, who played a dangerous game he heard about at school. They all wore school ties. He played a terrible game called the choking game. This young girl, and we'll never know whether it was this peer pressure, but he heard about it at school. But this girl was, I will be myself, power. She wasn't going to be victimized. She wasn't going to be bullied. She was going to go down her own path. And then all these other kids wrote these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful lines. So it led to another book called The Code, The Power of I Will. And ultimately now, millions of people have written their codes around the world, 12 lines. Every line begins with I will. It's just a simple way, not only to define your purpose, but also it's a simple way to deeply connect with other human beings. So when I do these in a big corporate event and people stand up, or I do it in a prison, people stand up and they read their codes. A lot of times people will start crying because this is an intensely vulnerable process for someone to look inside your heart and find the best part of yourself and write that down in the context of 12 lines, every line beginning with I will. So not only does it show absolute commitment, focus, and purpose, but it also shows deep love for self and deep love for others. Because I've read millions of lines of code, and this is life purpose, Rabbi, as I've seen it in the context of a code. The two principal commitments that people write. Number one is I will be better. We want to be better dads. We want to be better spouses. We want to be better team members. We want to learn more. We want to be better. And then we want to help others be better. So when people write their codes, it's one or the other, but it's always the one or the other. We want to be better and we want to help others be better. So it's a really simplistic, simple definition of our purpose. How are we going to be better and how are we going to help others be better? How simple is that?
Yeah, simple in words, but difficult in action. And I'm not sure if it's you or Noah in the Surfer and the Sage that speak about forgiveness and the idea of before you forgive others, you actually have to forgive yourself as well.
Absolutely, both of us. But I mean, both of us, both of us talk about that. So I spoke at a jail here in Santa Barbara before COVID, and I spoke to this group of well, male and female prisoners. But I spoke to this group of male prisoners and very 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 tough guys, all in there for a variety of different infractions, and all of them wrote their codes, and then they stood up and read it. And then the one guy stood up and started reading his code, and he was very strong, very imposing type of guy. And he starts reading his code in front of the other inmates, and he comes to the line, "I will forgive myself," and he starts crying. Now I'm looking, going, well, what are the other prisoners going to do? Are they going to see this as a sign of weakness or vulnerability? They all started crying and gathered around him and put their arms around him and hugged him. And I could see there that this little process, this little code that started out as empowering children, is such a wonderful way to connect and unite people, Rabbi, because division and lack of respect for others, this is a fundamental malaise. You've got Republicans on one side of the valley, you've got Democrats on the other side of the valley, and you have this black vacant space in between. And I like to think that this little code, this little open source code, is a little bridge between the two. And you know what my goal is? I would love the 100 senators.
I was just about to say, what if you went to Congress and did the code for them?
One at a time, stand up,
Mm-hmm.
and you read your 12 lines. Let me tell you, I will guarantee you the country will be better off for it.
Absolutely.
Because when people not only stand up with pride and power and purpose when they read their codes, when they listen to what other people have written, and they see that we are connected by these common values, we are way more connected than we are disconnected. But what's happening is media and partisanship is driving us apart. And I think this code is such a wonderful little tool to help bring us together. It costs nothing other than 15 minutes of investment.
You actually spoke about in the book sometimes nothing is a louder opinion than listening. Sometimes nothing is a louder opinion than listening. And I wrote to you the other day that that's the essence of the Shema, which is a declaration of our faith, that Shema means obey, but really it means listen. And so this power of listening in connection with the idea of forgiving yourself, I think goes hand in hand, and something that's missing in our communities today.
Yeah, the Shema, I mean, that Hear, Israel, it's just, it's so beautiful. And, it's so sad to see, anti-Semitism rear its ugly head again. And I think over the last number of years, there's been this sort of permission to be an anti-Semite from many, many, many people. So, I grew up in a segregated society. I grew up under apartheid in South Africa. And yes, we were Jews, but we were part of the privileged white class. And ultimately, South Africa became a democratic nation when Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, and we had our first democratic elections in 1994. But I mean, I saw racism and anti-Semitism firsthand. When I was a teenager, when I was 17 years old, I was in the South African Army, and yes, there was anti-Semitism directed towards us Jews, because we would people knew we were Jews. We eat kosher food, and even though I wasn't really that kosher, but everyone knew who the Jews were. So I remember the one day, and the Jews in South Africa, from my father's generation that fought in the Second World War, These were all tough guys. They were fighters. These were the Australian Jews, the South African Jews. A lot of them had come from a school of hard knocks. They were tough guys. They were one step removed from immigrants coming to the country with nothing. I mean, my grandfather repaired kettles, and eventually became a successful entrepreneur and businessman. But there was no tolerance, zero. There was zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. You didn't sit down and cop it. A guy came up to me. I was sitting down in the back of an army truck, and hey, Jew boy, that's my seat. There's a big tough, the bully guy. Hey, Jew boy, it's my seat. So now what you going to do? You're going to go, yeah, okay, have the seat? Or I stood up, I hit him with my head so hard I broke his nose, dropped him to the ground. Jew boy was never mentioned again in that army barracks. But that obviously is. I'm not an adherent of violence, but sometimes you just got to stand up for what you believe in. And there's just been this. I don't know, when you have this disgraceful individual, Kanye West and Nicholas Fuentes, walking around, strutting around Trump's compound, sprouting his vindictive, disgraceful words. It's words have got power. Words have unbelievable power. That's why I encourage people, when you write your code, your words have got power. And they got power for good, and they got power for evil too.
And I think the power for good and power for evil, that's crucial. And in fact, I think that deals with attitude. And you quote the brilliant and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl: the last of the human freedom is to choose one's own attitude. The last of the human freedom is to choose one's own attitude. And that's, I think, what we're choosing today. And hopefully more people are choosing the attitude of the code, as opposed to using these words for destruction, for evil, for division as well. So when you talk about surfing, and when we began, we talked about the firmament sort of being in between the land and the heaven. It seems like that surfer is that moment, that surfer is the person that can change that attitude as well. Maybe just talk about a little about Jews in surfing. You don't often hear as a sport that young kids are taking up. I grew up in upstate New York, not near a body of water. Now I'm living in Los Angeles, near a body of water. What would be your advice to young kids who are interested in the sport to take this on?
Yeah, I think just get out there. If you have any interest, you can buy an inexpensive softboard, get a teacher, and get out there. I mean, I would say that I feel closest to God when I'm in the water. It's just a beautiful way to connect with nature, and also to connect with your faith. So yes, there are not that many Jewish surfers around. I'm the only Jewish world champion, and I was very honored to be inducted into the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame in Netanya in Israel. And I went over there for the induction. It was a wonderful ceremony. But they phoned me up and they said, "Hey, Shaun, we want to have surfing was introduced into Israel by this wonderful man, Doc Paskovitz. He was a Stanford-trained doctor and a surfer, wonderful family. I know his whole family, and he introduced surfing in the early 60s to Israel. But they'd never, ever had a surf contest. A pro surfer had never been to Israel. So they invite me there. They said, "Shaun, we're going to have our first ever surfing contest in Tel Aviv at Hilton Beach, right in front of the Hilton Hotel." Said, "We'd like you to come out. We'd like you to open the event. We'd like you to give an exhibition. We're going to have the mayor of Tel Aviv, the mayor of Jerusalem. We're going to have the American ambassador down there." He said, "We're going to get 20,000 people there." I went, "No way." So I fly and I land in Tel Aviv. This is like early 80s. And I land and I get off the plane, and I'm walking towards the airport terminal. And there's hundreds and hundreds of people all screaming and shouting. And I'm going, wow, there's got to be some sort of rock star on this plane. And they all scream. And as I get closer and closer, they're all screaming and shouting for me. It was such a wonderful, wonderful experience to get that amazing welcome. So now they take me to the hotel. And I think, as I remember, I'm staying on the 13th floor overlooking the break where the surf contest is going to be held the next day. And it's absolutely flat. I'd never seen the Mediterranean before. There's not even any white water. It's like a bath. Again, it's impossible that they're going to have the surf contest tomorrow because it's absolutely unrideable. So that night we go out and we go out to all these parties and we're just having a fantastic time, and we get home really, really late. And then I wake up the next morning and I pull open the curtains and there's the surf, 4 to 6 feet, perfect. I'm going, only the Jews could pull this off.
Maybe it was the song of the sea. Mi chamocha be'elim Adonai, who is like you, God. And maybe that's what they sang when they actually crossed the Red Sea.
It was so funny to see this incredible wave. And then we had thousands of people there and I gave an exhibition. It was just amazing. Only the Jews could pull it off.
So I want to conclude on a lighter note in terms of this, the sport of surfing, and this video of, I believe, J Bay, and maybe you can explain your love of J Bay.
I love that wave. I first started surfing Jeffreys in 1968, and my first trip to Jeffreys, I went there with a short board. And in those days, we only surfed right at the end of the break called the point, because the waves were, it was just considered too fast and too dangerous. We had no leg ropes then, so it was, very intimidating to surf there on a big day. And it really helped me in identifying what kind of lines I need to draw. Because it's just this beautiful, long, powerful, strong wave.
So the lines that you need to draw, where are the lines between living that sort of dangerous life in the tube and, I don't know, living a life that I guess is safe and we don't take any risk?
Yeah, I think for, as sort of a former athlete and someone who still loves surfing, risk is just part of that experience. It's part of that commitment. It's part of taking that chance. And I think the greatest athletes are the athletes that put it all on the line and they're not scared to fail. And I've certainly taken those lessons through into my business life, and I like to think that I go for it. I'm not afraid to fail. In that little surface code, I wrote one of the lines, and perhaps one of my favorites is, "I'll always paddle back out." So you can try and you can fail and you can wipe out, but then you have the hope and the optimism to jump back on your board and paddle back out and to find that next wave. So for me, that's a good way to end, Rabbi, that I'll always paddle back out. I think it's a wonderful metaphor for people who have been suffering in today's times, that there will be another wave for all of us. We just got to paddle back out to find it.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful message, not just for the Jewish people. In fact, we're called in the book of Zechariah, Asirei Tikva, prisoners, but in fact, prisoners of hope. And what you do, not just in prisons, but in schools and life, is show us that way of tikva, show us that way of hope, and the idea of that's what we've done as a Jewish people, from literally the destruction of the temple and the first exile to today, that we continue to paddle back out as well. I'm actually would love for you to maybe join us at Sinai Temple on Passover when we read that Song of the Sea and address us in terms of what the meaning of the sea is within our own lives. In fact, many, many years past that miracle, because we continue to read that miracle today. Shaun, yep, go ahead.
Amazing, Rabbi. I would love to come down there for Pesach. So connect me up, and it would be so wonderful to come down and meet the congregation, meet some of the students. It would be really cool.
Thank you. And we are just thrilled to have Shaun Tomson, world champion surfer. If you don't have this book yet, please make sure you have this on your shelf, The Surfer and the Sage. If you haven't written your code of the 12 lines of I will, make sure you begin that process, as well as changing that attitude in life from despair to hope. Shaun, it's so great to have you on Rabbi on the Sidelines, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Rabbi. Cheers.